descendant of the Prophet, returns and leads the forces of the true believers in the final struggle against the forces of the unbelievers. Now, what is really alarming is that from the pronouncements, particularly of Ahmadinejad and others of his group, they believe that that time is now, that this is the end of time, that this is the final struggle.
Anybody who tells you that we shouldn't take this seriously is not looking at the individuals who are in power, who are ruling Iran today. They believe that by creating apocalyptic conditions that they will bring the Mahdi back. Every speech that Ahmadinejad gives, whether it's at the United Nations in New York or in Tehran or in Mashhad or someplace else, begins with this. He says, "Let my words and my actions hasten the return of the 12th Imam."
O God, hasten the arrival of Imam al-Mahdi and grant him good health and victory, and make us his followers and those who attest to his rightfulness.
Khamenei, Ahmadinejad, and some of the others truly believe that they've been put on earth in order to lead the Muslim world in a glorious jihad against the infidels and establish the rule of the 12th Imam on earth.
They really, in this cult, believe that they ought to try to get him back so they can have the battles that will end the world and send all them, in their view, to heaven and the rest of us to hell.
What makes that particularly alarming is the whole question of nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. But they didn't use them, and they knew that they wouldn't use them because of what we used to call at that time MAD, mutual assured destruction. Each side knew that if they used nuclear weapons, the others would respond in kind, and this would obliterate everybody. With these people, with their apocalyptic mindset, mutual assured destruction is not a deterrent, it's an inducement.
Deterrence is not likely to work since it's their purpose to bring about this calamity rather than to avoid it.
At the current time, and not once during the past 31 years of the existence of this regime, has the United States possessed the willpower to do anything about the Iranian regime in Tehran.
I think President Carter felt that he could deal with the Iranians. It turned out he couldn't. Ronald Reagan thought he could. It turned out that he couldn't.
Clinton through Bush and now Obama have all believed that there was some level of benefits that Iran could be offered that would get it to give up its nuclear program.
I don't think that one can proceed with this regime by negotiation. They regard this attempt or desire to negotiate as a sign of fear and weakness.
There's only one thing that the Iranian regime is seeking from negotiations over its nuclear weapons program with the West, and that's time to complete its weapons and its arsenal.
The regime in Tehran is determined to acquire nuclear weapons, and there are no carrots that the United States or anyone else can offer that's going to get them to give that program up before they achieve the objective.
Recognizing that diplomacy may fail, the Obama administration is considering alternative strategies.
Secretary Gates told the White House in January it had no effective strategy in place for dealing with Iran's nuclear capability.
So far, we're a paper tiger to the Iranians, and that's unfortunate.
The administration may soon shift toward a policy of containment, a strategy attempting to prevent Iran from using its weapons arsenal.
Nuclear containment is not a wise policy.
We've already seen Iran acting in a manner that is uncontained, specifically through its use of terrorism to wage war against the United States, against Israel, against other nations.
It would be far better if we could stop the Iranian government from developing its nuclear weapons and further developing its missiles.
You have to somehow have policies in place that question the legitimacy of the current regime, and do more than question it, but pressure it into going out of business.
For years, U.S. lawmakers have employed sanctions against the Iranian regime.
Sanctions have typically relied upon multilateral participation. And there are at least 2 permanent members, veto-wielding members of the Security Council, that are of a view that Iran is actually a client, not an enemy.
Governments like Russia and China have their own interests in Iran, economic interest, military and political interest. I think the Europeans clearly still see Iran as a big market. I think that's true for many businesses around the world.
You have only to walk through Tehran's malls stuffed with electronic goods from around the world to get the point. U.S. sanctions have been in place for more than 26 years, with limited impact.
The reason these countries and these companies continue to do business with Iran is they've never been put to a fundamental choice. You can either do business with Iran or you can do business with the United States, but you can't do both. It is an economic crisis that can help bring down this regime.
We need what people have been speaking of, which is crippling sanctions.
Extremely strong sanctions that would cut off essentially everything except food and pharmaceuticals and bare necessities of that sort.
The majority of Americans support tough measures against Iran. The support for economic sanctions is overwhelming, and it crosses party lines. In fact, the support for military strikes against Iran are surprisingly high.
I don't think it's a matter of choosing between diplomacy or sanctions or military force. The right way to use any of these tools is when they are interwoven. If you can't come to agreement, it's likely there will be economic pressure, and if the economic pressure is not successful, then military force may be utilized.
I have long hoped that it would be possible to bring down the Iranian regime without using military force. I fear we have squandered the time we had to effect that kind of change through non-military actions.
There are those in the world who say, this is mainly Israel's problem. Israel will take care of it. We don't need to worry.
Israel was created, among other things, to protect the Jewish people from future existential threats.
Israel's Air Force conducted an enormous military training exercise earlier this month that could be seen as training for an attack deep inside Iran.
If Israel feels compelled for reasons of self-preservation to mount an attack against Iran's nuclear weapons facilities, the United States will nevertheless be blamed for the Israeli attack, and the United States will be drawn into the aftermath of such an attack, no matter whether we were part of it at the beginning or not.
What you see all too often is everybody wants Israel to do it, so the United States and the Western European allies don't have to do anything. That's a very poor mindset.
I think it's important that Iran understand that U.S. military action is a very real option if we feel threatened.
I think that's a very unattractive option, but I think it's even more unattractive to contemplate Iran with nuclear weapons.
If all other options have in fact been exhausted, I think that the question is not simply what are the risks associated with acting militarily, but what are the risks associated with not acting.
The people of Iran, clearly, a majority of them, and perhaps a very substantial majority, have turned against the regime.
The Iranian regime is very fragile at this point. I don't think it can last forever. I don't know how long it can last.
The regime is no longer legitimate in the eyes of the overwhelming majority of the Iranian people. Ahmadinejad is a laughingstock, and Khamenei's pictures are routinely burned and stomped on at demonstrations. They hate him. They call him a murderer. They chant death to the dictator.
Iranians clashed, shouting death to the dictator, even taking over this police station at one point yesterday.
In June of 2009, there was an election for president, which most Iranians believe was a hoax.
The Iranian leadership, in particular Khamenei, simply didn't trust the system, and they cheated.
We call it a coup against the votes of the people of Iran, an election coup.
In scenes similar to 1979, millions of Iranians again took to the streets to voice their dissatisfaction with the rulers of Iran. The IRGC and the Basij were quickly deployed. Tens of thousands were arrested. Several hundred were killed.
مخالفان این کسانی که با این بنا با این حق و حقیقت مخالفت میکنن این فیض و جفاءن اینا در مقابل چشم شما انشالله نابود خواهند بود.
One of those murdered was Nida Aga Sultan, a music student on the periphery of the demonstrations. Video of her death spread quickly throughout the world via YouTube and other social media.
Whenever I see violence perpetrated on people who are peacefully dissenting, and whenever the American people see that, I think they're rightfully troubled.
The Iranian people, with such a proud and ancient history, were hijacked by a bunch of extremists. The fact that the United States keeps giving in to Ahmadinejad is a signal to the Iranian people that the American policy is to support Ahmadinejad.
It's not productive, given the history of U.S.-Iranian relations, to be seen as meddling, the U.S. president meddling in Iranian elections.
Well, the question is, should we have meddled in helping the dissidents of the Soviet Union? What is U.S. policy across the world? It's basically to always stand by the underdogs. At least make a stand, say a word.
We should be supporting the anti-regime elements, those who are fighting for their freedom, those who have been dissidents, those who are marching in the streets, yelling, Obama, are you with us or against us?
Ronald Reagan helped a lot with the collapse of the Soviet Union by calling them an evil empire and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It's very much in the interests of the people of Iran, as well as all of Iran's neighbors and us, for us to do everything humanly possible to get this regime to collapse before it gets a nuclear weapon.
It is in the interest of the international community and of the United States to lend all the support possible to the democratic movement inside Iran so that this regime will be changed as soon as possible. This is a question. Democracy inside Iran is a question now of international security.
We have allowed them to believe that they can literally get away with murder. And now they are going to have the weapons of mass murder at their disposal. We should take this very seriously.
قدرت پوشالی و سلطه شیطانی آمریکا بر جهان رو به نابودی است.
We in the free nations of the world met many terrible challenges in the 20th century, but that's no guarantee that we will be successful this time as well.
در همون دوران امام فرمود آمریکا هیچ غلطی نمیتواند بکند.
We have to succeed. You know that old tired adage, failure is not an option. Failure is not an option.
امروز سراسر ایران اسلامی از یک فریاد است و آن مرگ بر امریکا.
In the end, if the international community, if the United States will not form this resistance against the Iranian Khomeini's expansion, it will be too late. We will have to pay a much higher price. I'm talking about the entire humanity paying a much higher price to stop the threat.
The situation is grave, and it affects us all. Time is running short. Now is the time for action. Americans, Iranians, and members of the free world now have a choice: to stand idly by, or to stand up and take part in Iran's new revolution.